Hi, everyone. I'm Colleen Smith. I'm the Legislative Director for the Illinois Environmental Council. Thank you all for joining us today, and for many of you continuing to join us during these Lunch and Learn series. I've had a lot of fun being on a few of them, watching a lot more, just learning about a whole host of environmental issues. And today we're going to talk about what local governments can do on climate and environmental priorities. You're going to hear from Joy Hinz with DuPage, who's their environmental specialist, two Lake County board members, John Wasick and Paul Frank, and Chris Wheat, who's with NRDC leading their city strategies program. For those of you who are less familiar, the Illinois Environmental Council was formed in 1975 from several other environmental organizations getting together, realizing we needed to have a collective voice and to continue to grow our environmental power in Springfield and across the state. Today, we have nearly 90 environmental organizations as members, many represented during this webinar today. And I'm really proud of the work that I get to do down in Springfield on our state policy, but there's so much going on in this state with local government. So I'm really happy that we have a great lineup of speakers to talk about some of that. To start, just a few housekeeping items. Everyone is muted. If you're calling in and you want to ask a question later, hit *9. And if you are joining us via webinar, you can type your question into the chat box, or you can use the raise your hand feature, and we'll call on you when we do Q&A at the end. If you'd like, just as a fun kind of icebreaker to get us started, and want to say where you live, city, county, etc., into the chat box, maybe we'll get a little bit of a report about what's going on in your community and your local government is doing on the environment and clean energy during this time. So with that, I am going to turn it over to our Lake County board members and share my screen really quickly here. Wonderful. Paul and John, if you want to reintroduce yourselves as well and take it away.
Hi, John Wasick here. I'm a member of the Lake County Board, also the Vice Chair of our Energy Environment Committee, hailing from Grays Lake, Illinois.
Hi, this is Paul Frank. I'm a Lake County Board member from Highland Park, and I serve as the Finance Committee Chair. And just coming off of the Energy and Environment Committee, we had a new member join our board, so she's taken my spot on the committee, but have really worked closely with John and all our committee members with some of our initiatives. I want to thank the Illinois Environmental Council for inviting us to talk about some of the work that we've done in Lake County this year, and thank IEC and Jen and Colleen for all the great work they do on our behalf and for the future of the planet. And John's gonna talk through most of the work and handle most of the presentation, but I'm really happy to be here today. Thank you.
Thank you both.
Thanks for the thanks, Paul. We're really pleased to be doing this. We have been doing a lot of work in the past year. As you know, with the crisis going on, we've had to put a break on everything. But last year we started up, I'm not going to read everything off the slide. We started up the committee from scratch. It is now a standing committee. We had put into our county strategic plan the acknowledgement of climate change. So that meant we had to start a comprehensive program pretty much from the get-go to cover a lot of areas. So we had to do carbon footprinting of every department. We had to establish policies on how to do this. We definitely wanted to upgrade our use of alternative energy, and we're currently in the throes of contracting for solar panels on 10 county buildings. And we also are looking at all the other areas that we need to be looking at to reduce our carbon footprint, including recycling, looking at energy use in every department, introducing electric vehicles where we could. And all this required a lot of work, and mostly it was the work of our green team, which was led by Hannah Mulroy. I saw she logged in there. Thanks so much to Hannah. She's been doing an incredible job. And we also have a consultant, Grace Rink, who has been pulling this all together for us. So I'm not going to go through every single item we've done. I think the most significant one has been our, joining of the County Climate and the Greenest Regions Compact, which effectively aligned us with the Paris Accords. And we're one of the few counties, and probably the only big county in Illinois that we know of. Perhaps DuPage has done this, I'm not sure. Please chime in later if I'm wrong, and I apologize. To do this, and this really kind of set us up to do all the other work that we needed to do in terms of looking at future projects. So we need a few new buildings and rehabbing buildings, and we pretty much put it in the policy that any new upgrade or new facility that we will build will have all these alternative energy considerations, with the goal of doing zero carbon sort of impact considerations. So we have a whole work list, and I would love to take your questions. And we're still auditing. We're still drafting a net zero emissions policy, which is taking some time, of course, looking at air pollution sort of standards that we can implement, doing a waste audit. And we're also trying to work with other agencies. We're also forest preserve commissioners to do a net carbon reduction strategy that's more comprehensive, that would involve retaining carbon in any way we can, planting trees, restoring wetlands. That's more on the forest preserve side. But if we do this right, we're going to have a really broad-based program. So with that, I'll just kind of leave it. If Paul wants to add a few things, or Hannah will chime in. There's obviously a lot we're working on right now, and I don't want to hog all the time. So please ask any questions. I'd be happy to answer them.
Yeah, this is Paul again. I think I want to add something that you touched on briefly, John. It's really important for us, for local governments. I feel like our policy initiatives prior to the establishment of the committee and getting some of our goals into our strategic plan were one-offs. We had done a review of the vehicle fleet, looked at sort of low-hanging fruit for vehicle sort of idle reduction software. It's an inexpensive way that some vehicles could reduce emissions and provide some fuel savings at the same time. But we hadn't taken the big picture step back, and having the support of our consultant and our staff and buy-in from the department heads was a really big step in us moving forward on some of the policy initiatives. Aside from board members coming with an idea, I read this, I saw this, what about this? It was really important that we have the right thinking in place at the staff level, not just from the elected. So I would say, to me, that was the key for us to developing and starting to move forward with a bigger picture approach.
Yeah, thank you both. I'm even just looking at this, looking forward to 2020 slide you had, and all of the really exciting policies that are on here and that you're going to continue to work on. So as John mentioned, if you have questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. I think we'll probably do more thorough Q&A at the end as well. Let me see if we have one more slide here from you all. Oh, there you go. Just contact information for John and Paul for those interested as well. A little bit of what's going on in Lake County and the great work that you guys are doing there. So thank you. And moving along, I'm going to turn it over to Joy from DuPage to talk about another color county and what's happening there.
Thank you so much, Colleen. Good afternoon. This is Joy Hinz with DuPage County. We have been working on sustainability for multiple decades, but probably one of the turning points we had was in 2008. If you want to flip to the next slide, Colleen. The county board established this environmental responsibility and conservation policy. The policy revolved around these 5 different categories. What we were trying to do, as my Lake County counterparts were discussing, is really compel departments to start considering sustainability in all of their operations. We were trying to enable those departments to really start thinking outside the box and pursuing sustainability. We in our department kind of tried to push the needle, but without the other departments really moving things forward, we thought it'd be easier to accomplish things that way. You want to flip to the next slide. And the result of that policy, we have seen some significant accomplishments. A couple of times we've been awarded the Governor's Sustainability Award. We've been designated a green fleet. Our Division of Transportation has been a true leader in our area, trying to reduce chlorides, green buildings. I'll talk about the Arboretum Designation later on. And we did recently achieve the Soul Smart Bronze level. If you want to flip to the next one, Colleen. So here's just a quick little, I guess, photographic demonstration of some of the bigger projects that we have at the county. We do have an EV charging station that is accessible to both county employees and the public. We do offer it at no charge for 2 hours. Our solar roof was something that is on that LEED gold building. Native plantings, again, we'll talk about that later on, vegetated roof, and then our compressed natural gas station, which we put in, I believe it was 2010. And that's really been some of our launching points. Next slide. And I was bragging earlier about our Division of Transportation. They have been integral in a lot of our greenhouse gas reductions. They've done a system-wide traffic signal synchronization program in all of the DuPage County owned and operated signals. What that means is you're going to spend less time sitting at a stoplight, and we're coordinating the traffic signals to make it more efficient. Again, less gasoline use, more efficient. And, you know, one of the other added benefits that we don't talk about often is you're spending more time at home and just having a better lifestyle when you're not sitting at a stoplight. Again, low chloride de-icing. Our Division of Transportation has done a lot of education with our townships and local communities about how that is done. Next slide. Again, back to the Division of Transportation. For our traffic signal conversion to LED and the street light conversions to LEDs, we did get incentives from ComEd, so this is our celebration. So it's not just greenhouse gas emission reductions, we also did get some financial incentives for those projects. Next slide. Okay, and this has been a newer project that we've been working on at the campus. We've actually pursued the Arboretum Designation, and we've been identifying and mapping all of the trees by genus and species, taking a look at all of the trees that we have on the campus and increasing the number of trees. We did attain the level 1 Arboretum designation recently. And this is coupled with our native landscaping initiative as well. If you want to flip to the next slide, Colleen. We have done the calculation for those trees and all of those plantings, 739 tons of carbon storage, and obviously the added benefit of the stormwater runoff per year, equivalent to taking 500 passenger vehicles off the road. So we're looking at some pretty significant environmental benefits from that project. Next slide. Okay, and then SolarEdge Chicagoland. This, we were fortunate enough to work with the Midwest Renewable Energy Alliance and CUB, as well as a lot of our other Collier counties on the SolarEdge Chicagoland program in 2019. This was a group buy. residents were able to have solar panels installed on their homes. And the more folks that bought in, the higher the rebate incentive. So we were very fortunate that we had 44 installations into DuPage. We're still kind of celebrating that, but we're looking forward to 2020. We are in the process of finalizing the RFP with the Solarize Chicagoland group so that we can do that offering as well in, later this year in 2020. Next slide. Cool DuPage is our greenhouse gas reduction initiative. This is a countywide project. It is our goal to reduce greenhouse gases 10%, we say, by 2020. We did do a measurement at the end of through 2018, and we were at 8%. We do need to go back and do 2019 and see kind of where we're at. And then we'll again measure, obviously, probably every 5 years or so as we go. Again, 20% reduction by 2030. As part of this program, we have multiple local government partners, including our Forest Preserve and the municipalities shown here. Next slide. And then, as Lake County had on their slide, this is something that our county board pursued as well, our PACE program, Property Assessed Clean Energy Financing. This is a commercial program, limited to commercial at this point in time. It provides another tool in our toolbox, is the way we've been describing it. It provides commercial entities with access to money to do a larger scale, more comprehensive energy efficiency or renewable energy projects. In the way this is put together, it should cost a business less to invest in energy efficiency. Next slide. I think that rounds it out. Yep, this is my contact information.
Oh, sorry about that. Thank you, Joy. It was a great overview. Again, really impressed with the work that's going on in DuPage. Excited to get in a little bit more on that when we get into our questions. And I'll also add, I'm not sure if anyone from the Environmental Law and Policy Center is on today, but I like that both presentations so far have talked about the PACE program, something IEC helped support, make possible through state legislation, and seeing leadership in DuPage and Lake County, and there's also a City of Chicago project on that, really shows how some of the stuff that we do at the state can help the initiatives that you all are trying to do with the local government as well. So we'll get in a little bit more to that, and to get a perspective on the cities and what they can do, we'll turn it over to Chris Wheat.
Sounds good. Thanks, Colleen, and thanks everyone for making time. I really appreciate IEC for putting on these webinars and engaging a variety of people around the state, and as a reminder to people that the environment still matters. I think that one of the things that we try to emphasize with our teams not only who are working on the American Cities Climate Challenge, but this has also been a message from Gina McCarthy, our CEO, that we all came to the Natural Resources Defense Council to work on the environmental issues, and those issues haven't gone away. And in fact, they've become even more magnified and somewhat exacerbated by the current condition we're in. Not only an understanding of the role that things like air pollution plays in right now around issues around COVID-19, but also the job that our friends in DC are attempting to take around environmental protections right now, and using this crisis as a moment to continue the current White House's approach at degrading the environment. I'll talk a little bit about the project. I've been at NRDC for a little over a year. Before this, I spent 7 years at City Hall at the City of Chicago, including a stint as a Chief Sustainability Officer, and also it's been a stint as Chief of Policy under Mayor Emanuel. And so I was fortunate enough to both partner at times and also fight with Colleen and Colleen and Jen and others. Yes, you can get a baby bell. Can you get one for your sister as well? If you could turn to the next slide. I'll talk a little bit about what the American Cities Climate Challenge is, because many of you may not be familiar with it. It's a program funded by Bloomberg Philanthropies, which started in late 2018, early 2019. And the goal of the program is really to serve as an accelerator, to accelerate the work happening in some of our largest cities around the United States to reduce carbon emissions and really tie it into broader issues of public policy that we are all pursuing. We're focused on climate, and in particular, we're focused on issues around buildings and energy and transportation, because that's where cities ultimately generate their carbon emissions. So we have a pretty straightforward mandate. Our actions are designed to focus on reducing building energy use, increase renewable energy, reducing BMT, and electrifying vehicles. Could you turn to the next slide? And here's just a sample of the cities that we work with. A couple notes here. We do work with the criteria for cities that were able to apply to the program were the 100 largest cities in the United States. So we do work with very large cities. And importantly, though, a lot of the work that we're doing is not with the cities that are kind of always a part of that conversation. I think you always hear about the LAs and the New Yorks and the Portlands and Seattles. But we do work with a lot of those cities, and they're driving a lot of the really interesting ambition around the project. But we're also working with cities that you may not hear about all the time in these climate discussions. You don't hear about San Antonio a lot when we talk about these issues. You don't hear about an Indianapolis, but they're really doing amazing work. And part of what we're trying to do is meet cities where they are. You have some cities that are talking about congestion pricing and performance standards to reduce energy use in existing buildings. And then you have some cities that are starting to do things like energy benchmarking, who are working on like some of my counterparts talked about earlier, thinking about EV charging stations for their own fleet. And knowing that, ambition can look and feel different in lots of different cities, lots of different counties, lots of different municipalities, and trying to highlight and champion those stories around the country. Next slide. Let me talk a little bit about what we're seeing in cities today. So we've been in constant contact with mayor's offices, chief sustainability officers, and other staff in the 25 cities that we work with. In addition, we have embedded staff in all these cities as well. We call them climate advisors. They're staff who support our work in those cities. And so, where are these cities today? Particularly given that all these cities have been hard hit. Every part of the country has obviously been hard hit, but there's been a heavy concentration of cases and tragedies around COVID in large cities. So, cities are focused on safety and public health. That's first, second, third. That's the essential function of government. I'm sure that many of the commissioners on the call are on calls and thinking about these issues at the same time, and meeting those most basic needs for residents, while at the same time also protecting the most vulnerable individuals as well. So we have seen sustainability staff get moved over to really kind of a first response role in many cities, just meeting the basic needs of what's going on in a city, and also knowing that much of the workforce of a city can be impacted by this as well. So they're trying to fill holes for individuals who have been affected also by COVID-19. Secondly, they're starting to focus on the issues that we're seeing regarding the fiscal challenges that are going to be very apparent, and are already becoming very apparent, as I'm sure John's next budget book behind him will display in a significant way for the next fiscal year. What you see here on the right-hand side is a survey that was done by the U.S. Conference of Mayors and National League of Cities last year, or sorry, just a couple of weeks ago, about the fiscal impact. And so it's going to be huge, particularly for, you know, the largest of cities. One of the reasons the largest of cities are going to be impacted is that we see disproportionately often largest cities are focused on have large bases of restaurant and tourism taxes, which no one's going to a restaurant and no one's getting on a plane or going to a hotel. And so depending on the structure of how a city funds basic services, how much of it comes from the state, how much is dependent on property tax revenue versus other kind of more stable or elastic or inelastic forms of revenue, that plays a huge role as well. But if you look back at our map, a city like Chicago, you got tons of hotels and tons of restaurants, and that revenue isn't coming in. The same is true in LA and a few other cities. And we're seeing already many of our cities have June fiscal year ends. And so the rubber is very much meeting the road there. So for example, the city of Cincinnati, I think, has placed 1,300 of their employees on furlough. The city of Los Angeles, Mayor Garcetti, last night announced that they are placing a furlough of 26 days on all non-fire and safety employees or non kind of first responder employees. Several of our cities have implemented hiring freezes or programmatic freezes as well. And so the analogy that I've been using is that if you take the Great Recession of 08 to 2010, you combine it all in 3 months, and then you have a natural disaster happen in every state. That's basically the situation that we're in right now. The other part, which is something that we're trying to manage and help work with cities, is how do you work and engage remotely? You know, as a City Hall employee, I spent 7 years in City Hall of Chicago. I never worked a day remotely in that 7 years, and so the concept of working from home is often foreign to local governments. It's not something that's well established. It's not something that folks are necessarily equipped for. And so it, created a scramble of, can employees take their work computers home because they may not necessarily have a desktop at home in order to continue those essential functions. A lot of the work we do and a lot of the actions we work on think about community and stakeholder engagement, which is difficult to do in this environment, particularly if you're thinking about how do you contact and touch communities of color, how do you touch and get good feedback from low-income communities or historically disenfranchised communities at the same time. So you have issues of internet access, you have issues of just simply other priorities that are happening in folks' lives. And so, it's something that we've been working on. We frankly, for some of our cities, we just went out and bought Zoom accounts just because they didn't know how to do this. And so, it's taken some adjustment. There's obviously some muscle memory that cities and we all are learning, trying to feed your kids before you start a webinar. But it's definitely a phenomenon that cities are not necessarily used to, and we're trying to work with them. Next slide. So it ain't great. Let's be transparent here. Like this is hard. This work was already hard. The work that all of you do every day, that you support, the work that my colleagues do alongside IEC and others was already hard to begin with, and it's harder now. But one of the things that we're starting to think through are kind of what are some of the possibilities. And a couple things come to mind. One, and some of it is a defensive posture, is protecting what we got. So let's make sure that the sustainability offices are still funded. Let's make sure that our transportation offices are still funded, and those key personnel who are working and thinking about these issues on a day-to-day basis, frankly, continue to have jobs. Let's think about the programmatic dollars that go to support this work. Some of those dollars probably actually go to support some of the folks on this call as well. And so how do we try to protect some of those dollars and some of those funds? The next component is capital, and capital is very important as we think about particularly issues of transportation and how we're funding that. If we're thinking about things like retrofitting government buildings, how are we putting stopgaps in place to make sure that that work is happening as well? And so there is a little bit of just making sure that we're not backsliding too far, being empathetic and realistic with the reality on the ground, but also trying to be strategic as well. I think the second piece we're thinking about is how do we reframe a lot of the work around climate to more salient issues. I think that the reality of connecting issues of clean energy, connecting the issues of transit, of biking and pedestrian walkways have always had intersectionality to them, but it becomes more important now. And so thinking about how does this tie back into the economic recovery that inevitably we're going to have to get into? How does this tie into issues of public health? Because those issues are definitely salient and are going to be important on the yes, you can get a yogurt. Are going to be important as well to elected officials. And also how do we think about the new normal? How does that connect to issues, policies, programs that we care about? We're going to go through, and we are going through the most fundamental transformation of the global economy since World War II. And so are the actions and policies that we're doing and thinking about, do they actually meet the challenge? In one of our cities, we have been thinking for a while about issues of telecommuting and how do we get more employers on board to not have people have to drive to work. Well, you got a pretty good freaking natural experiment today. And so one of the things that we've been talking about with a lot of our cities and a lot of my colleagues, when we mentioned telecommuting, they're like, yes, what can we do? What are the policies? What are the partnerships on the corporate side that we can do around this? Which again, reflects kind of where we are, connects the public health and social distancing if we believe everything that we're seeing, that like this ain't going to be over for a while. And then also ultimately reduces vehicle smell VMT. Also, it's important to connect back to state and federal efforts. So, you know, one of the pieces in the CARES Act that wasn't talked about as much, but is hugely important, is that there was nearly $1 billion put into energy assistance through the LIHEAP program as a part of the CARES Act as well. It's one of the biggest infusions of cash we've seen in that program in decades. The last biggest infusion was during the Recovery Act. So, you know, the work is still going to happen at the federal and state level, and how that work is shaped around issues of climate, I think is really important. And then it gets connected back to issues of economic recovery and public health. And I think, you know, and to give a shout out to Jen and Colleen, to my colleague, JC Kibbe, and our team at NRDC and the NRDC Action Fund, who have been working on the Clean Energy Jobs Act for a long time, and thinking about how this now becomes a part of the economic revitalization that we do. And so it's not obviously just about the local work, but thinking about the state work as well. So on the right-hand side, you actually see some examples of some of the work that has happened in the last month or so in a variety of cities. These are not just cities. These are not just American cities, ACCC cities. But Columbus passed energy benchmarking. They were the first city in Ohio to do this. They did this really right at the top of the crisis. Building performance. Yes, you can also get fruit. St. Louis just on Friday actually passed a building energy performance standard, which will require existing buildings to reduce their carbon footprint and reduce their energy use. Which means that the only places in the country that have this are New York, Washington State, Washington D.C., and St. Louis. St. Louis typically isn't in that conversation, but I think it speaks to both the power of the coalition that they built in Missouri and the importance of this work. Thinking really hard about how we're using our streets, and that the streets can be designed to just move people and not just move cars, has been a very salient issue in a lot of cities. Oakland has moved forward on this work. New York City, I think, announced 75 miles that they're removing cars from as well. And one piece that I forgot to mention on here, as things were starting to happen, one of the actions that the challenge is working on in cooperation with IEC and others is around EV readiness. And so there was an ordinance passed in the Chicago City Council Committee to adopt a much stronger EV readiness ordinance with the support of Alderman Riley and others as well. So I think the point is that the work is still important, the work can still happen. And the message that we're articulating to our teams in our cities is to not work from a place of fear, which is hard because it's real freaking scary out there. Life is scary out there. But to not work from a place of fear, but work from a place of hope. And work from a place that we know the importance and gravity of these issues and the opportunities that they have to create. Those opportunities were there before we started this, and they're going to still be there as we come out. So let's continue to do the work. So that's all I've got. Thanks very much for making time, and looking forward to taking some of your questions.
Thank you. This has been great for me, at least personally. I see we have some good questions in the chat box. I'll run through, liking people putting in where they live, a lot of nexus with DuPage and Lake County, certainly some Chicago. So feel free to drop that in. I find it really interesting, Chris, that you used the phrase "be opportunistic," because that sounds on the face of it so bad. But I think the message that you're highlighting there is one that's really important. What does this pandemic that we're living in and experiencing right now show us about access to clean water, how our food system is operating, what we need to do on protecting clean air? And I think that while we need to triage and be most focused on immediate relief for impacted communities, we're missing out if we don't have those conversations about what this really does highlight in those disparities. So I have one question for everyone, and then I see that we're starting to get some in the chat box, so don't be shy. Chris also talked about the fiscal reality that these cities are experiencing. We hear that a lot in Springfield, the decline of local government funding. And I know that that is not an issue that solely cities face. So I'm curious from the county perspective too, what are you seeing? What do you anticipate given the current pandemic? What do you anticipate given just steadily declining revenue sources? And how are you thinking about how that impacts the work on environmental priorities for the near and short term to come?
This is Paul. I have a quick thought about your question there, Colleen. So in Lake County, we've asked our finance folks to give us an estimate, a range on what we anticipate the impact's going to be. It's quite big. We don't know the real numbers yet. So we're sort of preparing and making some worst case scenarios. It's we're looking at planning for a 20 to 25% reduction in many departments across the board. That's sort of the initial planning that we're doing, but we truthfully don't have a handle on numbers. The flip side to the revenue decrease is the spending side and trying to prioritize, all local governments. Certainly at Lake County, we have a multi-year capital plan with some significant projects. And, there's obviously the economic development and job maintenance portion of that spending. And I know John and I have talked quite a bit, and John's really a proponent of, hey, we should continue to do some capital spending. And some of those projects are some green infrastructure. And so we're, you know, that's a decision point you have to weigh at the end of the day. Are you still going to spend capital dollars to keep those jobs and projects moving forward as a way to help the economy?
Thanks, Paul. I can add a little bit to that. I think that in order for us to figure out what's on the other side of this crisis, one, we need to see environmental issues in progress as part of an infrastructure question. So we know that we need to upgrade facilities. We know that we need to address air pollution, water pollution, stormwater issues as we're doing this. But essentially, they're all environmental things that we need to do. And if we put it in the frame of like, well, we will need to still address infrastructure on a broad scale, but while we're at it, we need to consider them as environmental projects as well. So for a lot of us, it's really win-win. The only big question, as Paul mentioned, is what's our revenue fall off going to look like? And it's not going to be pretty. But I think at the same time, while we are getting to the other side of this, we say to ourselves, look, we need infrastructure. We need to do upgrades. We need to recognize that climate change is still on our radar screen. How do we do this? Well, we have to prioritize the projects that we had before in the frame of creating jobs, in the frame of addressing these issues as well. So we just can see it through the same lens. I think that would help all of us.
Yeah, that's a really good point, especially when environmental programs are often first on the chopping block. But when you really talk about it in the terms of relief and recovery, that's how we're going to save those. But Joy, did you want to weigh in and answer that question at all too? I know you talked about some of the savings from environmental programs.
I'm in the fortunate position where I'm not in our finance department, so I kind of am naive as to what the reductions will be, but my understanding is they will be substantial. But we have always taken a very practical approach when it comes to our environmental projects and really looked at the return on investment. Most of these projects are coupled with incentives and or just energy savings that really make sense. So that's kind of been our ongoing mantra, that energy efficiency, renewable energy, most of those have such a good payback that I think in the long term, they're still going to be the right choice. And we'll see. We still have an environmental committee, we still have environmental staff, and I think we're still going to move forward with several of our sustainability projects. It might be at a slower pace, but we will keep moving the needle, I think.
Yeah. And I saw Sandra from Macon County. For those who don't know where that is definitely not in the Collier County area of our state. It's further south. Asked about, conservative local governments during this time cutting their budgets and what that means for environmental programs. And I think that to the point Joy just made, we do this at IEC all the time when we're talking to conservative decision makers. There's certainly a moral need to be prioritizing some of these programs now more than ever. But I think also the numbers don't lie. There is just savings for energy efficiency programs, and many other instances, whether it's some of the green infrastructure upgrades even, or it was exciting to hear all of our speakers talk about green fleets. And while we often hear about the upfront costs of having electric vehicle fleets or for local governments, less often talked about is the cost savings in the long term from those. So I think that's kind of the answer to the question of how do you get conservative municipalities to still go along with some of these.
And if I can add something, Colleen?
Yeah, of course, John.
This is my mantra, and we did face this whole opposition to doing this. Oh, it costs too much. We'll never get a payback. Paybacks are too long. The traditional tropes that we've been hearing for years. And I just say, look, good ecology is good economics. You will see a payback. We're reducing operating expenses. We are reducing our energy usage. And guess what? That's money that we don't have to spend, and it's good stewardship of taxpayers' money. So good ecology is good economics.
I like that. Maybe we'll have to borrow it. Good question from Mary Jo in the chat that came to my mind as well, just about how the different local governments intersect with each other. So she specifically asked, do the counties facilitate sustainability planning and implementation with the municipalities within their borders? And maybe also broadly, just Joy, Paul, John, Chris, talking about what is that kind of interplay between the county and cities, sure on sustainability planning broadly, but on a number of environmental issues.
Yeah, this is Paul. It's a key question. It's sort of on our to-do list, but we haven't gotten to that next step of integrating with other local governments. You know, we're the county board members in Lake County. We also serve as our Forest Preserve District board members as well. So we have, you know, we wear a completely different hat where all we do is buy land and plant trees. And then we have this other county side where we're responsible for county government operations, which obviously is more well-funded. We've talked about growing and building a sort of countywide intergovernmental approach to communicating, you know, carbon mitigation strategies and partnering with municipalities and other local governments and sort of getting there in the future, but we haven't started to develop that yet.
And I can't add to that, and I am in total awe of what DuPage has been doing in terms of partnerships. And we are really working hard to develop more partnerships. I mean, we'd love to work with DuPage, we'd love to work with NRDC. And we're talking to the Morton Arboretum, plant more trees, working with the Chicago Trees Initiative. So a lot of these things are happening. It's just a lot of, it means getting people in the room and getting out of our policy seats and saying, look, what does it take to get this stuff going? You know, how do we get momentum? How do we get these other groups involved? Getting the Sierra Club involved, or Open Lands. There's so many great environmental groups in Chicago that have never really worked with government directly, at least not to the extent that we're actually forming better policy or we're doing better programs. So all of this is a work in progress. I'm kind of excited about it.
I can chime in from a looking kind of across the board. You know, obviously we work in a lot of different cities in a lot of different parts of the country. The city-county connection, the short answer is it depends. Sometimes it's a function of governmental structure. And so we have some places where, you know, like Honolulu, where the city is the county. And so that changes the dynamic or maybe the relationship that they have with the state government. Other places, it's a very different dynamic. And also, you know, candidly, the political power that may sit in a county or city, and that, you know, big sibling, little sibling relationship can get complicated as well. I think, you know, from a policy standpoint, one of the areas where we're pushing for more cooperation, it's going to be necessary, is one, a lot of people have mentioned pace, because in many places, you know, the county is a key agent because the county is the one who sends property tax bills. And so from a logistical standpoint, it's important to have a county assessor or county clerk on board. The second piece more broadly is around issues of transportation, because that's really where a city may control, you know, thinking back to my old gig, you know, Chicago was a very big portion of the ComEd territory. And so we controlled a lot of the energy use within our borders, and we did have some authority through things like municipal aggregation or whatnot to do work. Transportation is real complicated because you've got city roads, county roads, state roads. Inevitably, in many places, you have people coming in and out of a city or in and out of a county on a daily basis because people are going to or from work, to or from cultural events, sporting events, whatnot. And so the cooperation at a kind of the inter-city or inter-county cooperation through someone like the Chicago Metropolitan Agency for Planning becomes critically important at that point. And so I think kind of thinking about, and that also creates an opportunity to work together. So a lot of cities and counties were working together in the last capital bill, which was part of the advocacy also from IEC and NRDC to make sure that we're funding things like transit, because transit is an important piece of so much work. So I think really thinking about the connections around transportation, because people don't necessarily move on boundaries of city or county. They just go to work, or they go to the store, or they go visit a family member, I think is going to be the next kind of great opportunity. And given we're completely changing how we're moving in this society now, will be even more paramount.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. I know that especially those in Lake County are no stranger to some of the difficult transportation decision-making strategies that happen here, and certainly some of the IEC partners that are on this call today. Joy, you specifically talked about Cool of DuPage in your presentation, so maybe you want to answer this question of how DuPage thinks about sustainability planning and providing resources and partnership to its municipalities.
Sure. With Cool DuPage, we went to our municipalities and voluntarily asked them, would you consider this? Can we partner? We've kind of become a clearinghouse for information to support the municipalities. We're trying to be the best partner in that fashion, as opposed to, we don't have the authority to dictate what our municipalities do. So we kind of felt like an information, bringing them the incentives, the offers, and doing what we can to support them, because they seem to have a better communication opportunity with the residents, that they would be integral in really getting things done. We've also been in the fortunate, we've had, I appreciate the compliment from Lake County saying that we are, doing a lot, but we've been in the fortunate position where we've been supporting our municipality for years through recycling events and such, and our environmental education program. So we've been doing what we can over the years. So we've developed a kind of a good relationship with our municipalities who are willing to partner. And it's more on a staff level. It's not really on the political level. And that's where we find that we've been very successful. And we've always, Andy, my counterpart as well, and I just kind of have always had an approach where if we develop something, we'll share it. Happy to share it, whatever you need, want. I've been working with Hannah, in Lake County as well with the PACE program. If we do it, it's yours. Take it, run with it. Happy to do whatever anybody else needs.
It's great to hear. Well, so I think we have time for 2 more questions, and I see one in the chat that I'll get to, and then I've got one to close this out. So there was a question from Jenny about zoning or road infrastructure projects in regard to smart growth and avoidance of sprawl. And I thought maybe it'd be helpful too if our presenters could talk just about zoning and various decisions around land use or building codes. There was some conversation about net zero or EV and solar ready, and kind of the role local governments can play in those decisions as it relates to climate and environment.
Well, I guess I'll go first. We are tackling a number of different things in a number of different ways. So, for example, we had a solar ordinance that took more than a year to put together, and if Hannah can chime in, she was the author of it primarily, which really encompassed the entire county, and that was quite a bit of work. So that was the first step. In terms of broader zoning issues, we're kind of taking those one at a time in terms of updating like a watershed development ordinance and things like that. And those things tend to take a little bit more time than just saying, hey, we're going to do a new program on electric vehicles. So that's a bit of a heavy lift for counties, but it's something we want to do. In terms of transportation, we have integrated, a sustainability, not standards yet, but sort of ideals within that to come up with a multimodal overall plan. And again, that takes several years to implement, and then policy-wise to figure out, well, how are we going to do this? What does it mean? You know, and we do little things too. We conserve, you know, road material, recycle it. We're replacing street lights with LEDs, and you know, so it's very incremental. But overall, there's a philosophy behind it that we're trying to enshrine in policy. So it does take time, but you know, it's worthwhile working with a number of different stakeholders and outside researchers to get it done.
Thanks, John. Chris, you look like you would thought on that.
Yeah, I'll chime in. Just, I guess the one that I would say, I think in a lot of our work that we're doing around the country, around issues of land use and zoning, one of the things that we're grappling with and we're doing a better job, but not a great job with, is how do we center equity as a part of that work, knowing kind of the historical inequities and the and how issues of zoning and land use have been used to keep certain communities where they are, and have also been a tool to devalue certain communities as well. And so that's very much a marathon, not a sprint. And you know, how do we balance the importance of development, because development is a critical part of doing things like expanding property tax bases, and giving opportunities for cities and people to grow, while at the same time making sure we're not exacerbating historical inequities at the same time. And so, you know, we've been thinking about things like equitable transit-oriented development, which is some work I did back in my old shop, and some of our other cities have been thinking about this work as well. How do we think about affordable housing and what are the requirements around development associated with that as well? So we think there are good solutions out there with varying levels of ambition of cities, but we want to make sure we're not forgetting it.
Thanks, Chris. That's awesome to hear, and we definitely echo the call for just making sure that all of our policies really are being thoughtful, not only about impacted communities, but truly having them be leading what those policies look like. So in time for one last question, I thought I'd just see if someone had a 30-second pitch from our presenters. You have a huge group of environmental advocates, many of whom you work with, some of whom you may not. Obviously, IEC does a majority of our work at the state level, increasingly so at local governments, because it is so important, because inaction at the federal level will continue or be challenging, and making progress at the state level can also take time and be really piecemeal. So any advice to the grassroots and policy experts you have about how they should be thinking about local government advocacy during this time, to close us out?
This is Paul. My advice is, if you know of an example of a successful policy or something that you want to see implemented in your government, and you think it makes sense, but you're getting resistance, that's sort of a common theme, right? A lot of times we have local government staff or administrators who think, well, this is how we do things, or this is the vehicle we purchase, or this is what this department needs. It does sometimes take more effort to change thinking, and I would say the important thing to remember is to keep pushing and to find ways to get to where you think your government needs to be.
Thanks, Paul. Joy or Chris, any words of wisdom?
Joy, go ahead.
Oh, thanks, Chris. That's a tricky question. At staff level, you know, I encourage you to reach out. Feel free to reach out to me or anybody on the sustainability staff. We do what we can to push it through the politicians or the policymakers, I should say. It's tricky. It's not. Sustainability is not always at the forefront of the policymakers' decisions, because They're weighing other things. There's about 100,000 other things and other priorities going on. So keep asking, make a good case, make a good argument, and see if you can get the support.
I would say two things. I'll rinse repair in just a second. You want to hand it to me? Okay, thank you. So I got to go rinse repair in a second. But two things. One, there is someone working on climate in every city hall, in every village hall, in every county office in the country and in Illinois. They just may not call it that. They may say that they're the public works director, or they're in charge of fleet issues, or, you know, as we were talking about, they had zoning and land use issues, but it's climate. It just, so find that person, find those people, and don't get too caught up on finding an environmental director or a sustainability officer as a part of that. I'd say that's number one. And number two, go and call people and tell them you want to do stuff. This is often for, you know, villages and city councils and mayors. They don't get called every day about everything. And so it may just take 5 or 6 calls in order to get a thing done. They may not have phone banks coming at them. In my old job, a lot of the calls I made were just because someone saw the mayor and had a thing. And then it was my job, after some creative language from him, to go and call them and talk to them about that. So, you know, you've got more power than you think you do. And I think especially at the local city, village, county level, that's incredibly important to keep in mind. So reach out and tell people, as Joy said, reach out and tell people you care and that this is important to you.
Well, thank you, Chris. Echo that 100%. Really blessed by this overall environmental community and the continued education and advocacy that you all are doing during this time. And thank you, Joy and Paul and John, for taking some time today. And I know we're just after 1, so appreciate your support for IEC. Jen put a little bit into the chat about how you can find out more about our Lunch and Learn, how you can donate, continue to support us, and enjoy your Tuesday. Take care, all.
Thank you. Happy Earth Day.